as much as possible, stay home. Don't go out unless you absolutely have to.
An extraordinary plea from Canada's Prime Minister to work together by staying home to help slow the spread of COVID-19. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Across the country, tougher measures are coming into force as communities face the growing threat of the pandemic.
COVID-19 constitutes a danger of major proportions. We must act decisively and we must not delay.
That's Ontario Premier Doug Ford today declaring a state of emergency. And BC and Alberta have declared a public health emergency. In Ontario and Alberta, gatherings of more than 50 people are banned. In Ontario, restaurants and bars have been told to shut down. The move comes after Ontario's first death from the virus, a man in his 70s from Barrie. BC announced 3 new deaths today. That brings the total number of deaths in Canada to 8. In terms of total infections, the situation is changing quickly. Over the last week, the number of cases has grown steadily in Canada, and it continued to climb today. As of tonight, there are more than 570 cases in Canada, including those who have recovered. BC reported a major spike today, 83 new cases, bringing the total to 186. The other provinces with the most cases are Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec. The 6 other Canadian provinces have all detected the virus. The Prime Minister says his government is considering emergency measures to better tackle the pandemic. For now, he's asking Canadians to do their part by staying home. Mike Armstrong has tonight's top story.
There is no question what the Prime Minister is trying to convey, a delicate balance of calm and concern. The country's healthcare system at this point, he says, is strained but strong.
Whether you're a doctor or a nurse, a hospital administrator or maintenance staff, you are doing an incredible job.
This is a stressful time for everyone.
There may also, understandably, be some strain on politicians. It wasn't hard to hear the emotion in the voice of the federal health minister as she appealed to Canadians to help each other.
Make sure that you're kind to one another. Check in with vulnerable people by phone. Think of ways you can help to ensure that we get through this together.
The main focus continues to be on flattening the curve, cutting down on transmission. To keep people home, as of tomorrow, the federal government is shutting down all national parks and all heritage sites.
What this means for our parks is that pretty much anything with a door will be closed.
The issue of the door into Canada is still being debated. Ottawa is closing the border to most of the world effective just after midnight, but not to Americans. The Deputy Prime Minister says the border is a lifeline to both countries, moving goods, medicine, and workers, but she's heard the criticism.
We're very aware that the situation for British Columbia is particularly acute, and I had a long conversation with Premier Horgan about it last night.
We have to slow down the spread of COVID-19.
The Premier of Ontario is declaring an official state of emergency. Much of the province is shutting down nearly everything other than grocery stores and pharmacies and restaurants that do takeout or delivery. Ottawa isn't going quite that far. It has not enacted the Emergencies Act yet.
It is a very serious step.
3 different federal ministers referred Tuesday to the Emergencies Act as a, quote, last resort, saying they hope we don't reach the point where it's needed. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Ottawa.
Canada's Emergencies Act would allow the federal government to declare a public welfare emergency, and that would give the government sweeping power to lead a national response to the outbreak, like restricting the movement of people, regulating how goods and services are distributed. It also allows the government to set up emergency shelters and hospitals. It was formerly known as the War Measures Act and was used during the 2 world wars, including to censor newspapers and religious groups. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau last invoked it during the 1970 October crisis, when members of the Front de Libération du Québec kidnapped the province's deputy premier and a British diplomat. The federal government is expected to unveil an emergency stimulus package tomorrow to help Canadians get by and keep the economy afloat. Global News has learned key details. Let's bring in Global's Mike LeCouture in Ottawa. Mike, what are you hearing?
Yeah, Robin, we have learned that the economic stimulus package presented by the government Wednesday will be worth between $20 and $30 billion. It's a massive figure that gives us an idea of how significant the government thinks the overall need could be and perhaps how long Canadians will require financial support. Now, the announcement will be made by the Prime Minister and then additional details will be laid out by the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. Justin Trudeau has been leading meetings with key cabinet ministers for the past few days in order to come up with this plan. We're also hearing that the deadline for filing your income tax returns will be extended by 1 month, meaning you'll now have until June 1st. Now, businesses are also being given an extra month, so their deadline will be July 31st. But some business owners that we spoke to today worry they won't survive if more sweeping measures aren't brought in by all levels of government. Lindsay Thompson and Jonathan Bonney have run the King Eddie in Ottawa for 5 years. There have been a lot of ups and downs in that time, but this is nearly rock bottom.
Obviously, our biggest fear right now is just maintaining a clientele, paying the bills, being able to keep the virtual doors open, so to speak.
Virtual doors because the province of Ontario is closing all dine-in restaurants and bars. Only takeout and delivery are allowed, which means wait staff will be scaled back.
Obviously, we are anticipating that this would, be inevitable. So at least now today we can go forward and inform our staff what this means.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford knew workers could be severely impacted by his decision to close bars and restaurants across the province. While his government is putting together a financial stimulus package, Ford is leading a chorus of premiers urging the federal government to step up and help workers.
It's essential the federal government gets moving on the EI, instant EI for people that have been laid off.
And if the federal plan isn't finalized yet, BC's Premier has some suggestions.
They need to make sure that they're not shortchanging people in this crisis. It's a go big or go home environment, it seems to me.
BC Premier John Horgan says he's confident the Prime Minister understands that, but he says there is a sense of urgency now because his government can't make a move on worker compensation until he knows what the federal government is doing. Robin?
Mike Lecouture in Ottawa. Thanks, Mike.